Hi, this is Peter Woolfolk speaking. Now, first of all, thank you so very much for listening to the podcast. Now, I am very excited to let you know that the podcast is now available on Amazon Alexa. You know the drill. Simply say, Alexa, play Public Relations Review Podcast, and she'll take it from there. And again, thank you for listening. And if you enjoy the program, please become a subscriber. Now, on to the podcast.
Welcome. This is the Public Relations Review Podcast, a program to discuss the many facets of public relations with seasoned professionals, educators, authors, and others. Now, here is your host, Peter Woolfolk.
Welcome to the Public Relations Review Podcast and to our listeners all across America and around the world. Apple has ranked this podcast among the top 1% of podcasts worldwide. So thank you to all of our guests and listeners for being the basis for this ranking. Now, if you enjoy the podcast, we certainly would like to have a review from you, and we'd like to ask you to share this with your friends. Now, question, is Google still the leading search platform for public relations practitioners? Can anyone overtake Google? Well, the new platform on the block are called LLMs, large language models. And my guest today will expand on LLMs and why they are more impactful. So joining me today from Atlanta, Georgia is Frank Strong. Frank is the founder and president of The Sword and the Script, a veteran-owned business focused on public relations, content marketing, and social marketing for the B2B marketplace. He has implemented programs and led teams for public relations, content marketing, and social media on the in-house side of the table, with corporations ranging from startups to the mid-market to global organizations. He has also endured the rigors of billable hours, having grown up on the agency side with gigs at PR firms, small, large, including the top global firm Hill & Knowlton, now HK Strategies. So, Frank, welcome again to the podcast. Now, give us an overview of LLMs and the major impact it is having on public relations and searching.
Hi, Peter. Thanks for having me back. It's good to see you again.
Okay.
Yeah, LLM stands for Large Language Model. It is the model that drives kind of generative AI interface. So if you go to a platform like ChatGPT, Perplexity, Google's Gemini, Claude, any of those platforms, they're all being driven by an LLM. And without getting into all the ins and outs, an easy way to think about an LLM is it's kind of like a very sophisticated word suggest. So if you go to a traditional Google search engine and you start typing in a search term, it's trying to guess what you're going to ask. You know, if you say red cars, it could say red cars in Kansas, red cars in Brazil, fast red cars. So it's going to give you all of these suggestions. And so LLMs kind of work the same way.
Well, now that we've heard that sort of over basic explanation of it, what is it actually doing? I mean, as people are using it, what are they getting? What are they seeing that is causing this rush over to LLMs?
Yeah, I think it would be good. I'll just take a quick step back and explain kind of the old newspaper model and how that was displaced by Google and how that's being displaced by LLMs today. And the reason for that is, it's conceivable there are people today that didn't grow up seeing stacks of newspapers by a vendor. And so a traditional newspaper, you want it to be what was called above the fold. If you hold a newspaper straight up and you fold it in half, they would stack the newspapers together. It would look like a bale of hay. And that's how they shipped them around. That's how it was displayed on the newsstands. And so the above the fold front page of a newspaper was the most visible place that you could possibly be. And for years and years, that's how people got most of their information until Google came along. And then it got a whole lot easier. Instead of sorting through a newspaper when you're looking for information, or newspapers, it could be many, or going to the library and sorting through microfiche film of old newspapers, you could just go to Google, ask a question, and it would give you a list of sources, right? And you could choose which source you wanted to look at. You could review which ones answered your question best. Those queries that answered your question best tended to rank higher over time in the search engine. That's all being changed by LLMs. And the reason for that is LLMs are able to present information as just an answer. It's almost like you're talking to a person and they're typing up a response to your question. You ask it a
Hmm.
question and it gives you like a primer. That comes with some benefits and drawbacks too. It should be noted. Like when you think, for example, when you went and did a traditional Google search, it gave you however many results it could be, 20, 30, 100, and you got to choose what information you thought best answered your question. LLMs present it as a briefing and it presents it from a position of authority. Like, here is the answer to your question. And that can be, that can have some drawbacks, mainly because A, it's providing an answer, and that may or may not be the correct one or the one that works best for you. And two, we know for a fact that generative AI programs do hallucinate. That means they just simply make up the answer. And they're doing that because they're trying to, it's basically like an average of words. So you have to be careful what you believe.
I have I read your article. I looked into some of the LLMs, and I jumped onto a Perplexity, and I asked it a very basically a question such as how many listeners does the Public Relations Review podcast have? And wow, it was very, very quick with that coming back. I was shocked at how much information came back, and it came back in a format as though we had a conversation about this. So I was pleased about it. It did not give me a specific number, as you said before. It let you know, hey, we went here, and here's what we got there, and these other sort of places. So I was not only was I pleased, I was just surprised at the format that it came back in, and I think that surprised and perhaps be helpful to a lot of people who might consider using these.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's incredibly amazing, and I think your example brings up a good question because you've had this podcast for a long time, so
Mm-hmm.
it's been indexed, and these large language models have been able to be trained on all kinds of content, and obviously including your podcast. That's how it's able to return the answer. And so the question that it conjures is, if LLMs are going to be the new front page, and there's some evidence suggesting that this is happening. Google's search traffic has dropped for the first time since 2015, and
Mm-hmm.
it was a small amount, but there is data that suggests referral traffic from LLMs, Perplexity, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Google Gemini, that's grown. So we know that this is in translation. So the question that PR professionals should be asking themselves is, how do we get into an LLM? You've gotten your podcast into an LLM, and that is one approach, right? You have to have content. And I think a lot of the answers to the question of how do I pitch an LLM comes back to the fundamentals that PR people already know. It's having a strong point of view. It's being able to articulate a story so that it gets picked up and gets a visibility and,
Right.
and index. It's answering specific questions, right? When people go to a traditional search engine and they type in a search query, that is by definition an expression of need. I'm looking for information. So answering specific questions is a great way to get crawled and indexed by an LLM to provide that response. And then last but not least, the traditional aspects matter. So traditional media is going to be deemed highly credible by LLMs, and so it's going to use that to train the data and return answers. All of the traditional things that PR people did, press releases, for example, there seems to be some evidence suggesting that press releases are being used, and that makes a lot of sense to me because when you think about press releases relative to the writing on the rest of the web, and we can make fun of, press releases are promotional and people do funky things with them, but the writing is probably a higher quality relative to the rest of the web. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's a really good data set on which to train these models. And I think that's why it's happening. If there's a caveat, it would be that at some point, this happened with Google. Press releases were a good way to get into search engines. Google started deprecating the link value because they don't want you to be able to buy a press release to get into their search engine.
Right.
That's kind of gets spammy. I suspect something like that will happen with LLMs at some point.
Where else do you see LLMs fitting in? Because some of the things we've talked about here, and I think I may have mentioned earlier that some organizations where consumers could call into the company and ask questions about the company or company products or those kinds of things. Would this be an appropriate use for LLMs?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's two ways to look at that. One would be to ask a question, just like you asked the question of perplexity about your podcast. You can go to any, public generative AI tool and ask a question about a company, and it's going to return results. And that's the kind of media relations aspects that PR people need to be worried about is how are we being presented in these LLMs? That's one use
Mm-hmm.
case. The other use case along those lines is companies can purchase technologies, these generative AI tools, and train them on their internal documentation. If you have a product, for example, a technical manual, that can consume the whole technical manual, probably do it better than a human.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's trained on the answers that customers may have about your product. So come to a chatbot on your website and they ask a specific question, and that AI has been trained on your product documentation, it can return a very good answer, which is a far it sounds like a far better approach than saying, here's a bunch of help desk articles.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead and search through these and see if you can find your answer. And then if you can't, submit a support ticket and we'll get back to you whenever we can and we'll schedule a call and go through your issue, right? So it's just improving the experience, I think, from a customer service perspective. And that's a great use case. That's being adopted now.
Well, I certainly see that as a viable function. I'm sure there might be some companies using that already. As a matter of fact, I even see where they've got some companies have AI videos that can respond to consumer questions. And so I'm sure that other organizations are going to use this as a PR tool because, yes, we can answer your question right away. You don't have to wait for a real person to show up. As soon as you call us, we can get back to you, or we can answer you right away, even with someone talking to you. And in some cases, I wouldn't be surprised if they can take a real human face and animate it so that it looks like it's actually talking. In some cases, I think that is being done.
Oh yeah, that's definitely happening. Some of the visuals are really compelling. I mean, they're able to make, fully fledged movies based on some generative AI prompts. It's actually crazy. One of the ways that you can notice, though, is that for whatever reason, the same way that generative AI tends to hallucinate with text-based answers, it makes some wonky errors with visuals. Like if you ask it to create a picture and you look at the hands, it tends to have like 7 fingers on it. It'll have like weird things like that. So these are like telltale signs in videos and
Uh-huh.
images that you're able to
Right.
spot some of this.
Well, what are some of the other things that you see in the future for public relations with these LLMs?
Well, I think we're in the middle of a sea change right now. Like now is the moment, right? If you were around when the Google search engine started becoming the dominant source, the first source of place that people went to for information,
Mm-hmm.
we're seeing that transformation happening now. Google, the traditional search engine, is very worried about this, by the way.
Right.
That's why they're investing in Google Gemini, and you may see what they call AI, artificial intelligence overviews in search. If you go to Google right now and you type in a search, it's going to give you an AI overview. So they're working on this. They're playing catch up. ChatGPT caused them by surprise. But I think this is an area that is emerging rapidly. We can see that it is taking over as a primary source because it provides a very neat, clean, simple answer when people ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got to be up on it. It means we're going to have to monitor our reputation there. How are these LLMs presenting the organizations that we represent, whether it's an employer or a client? How do we correct things if they go awry, right? What happens when there's crisis communication? If it's getting something wrong and it sends off a tizzy, how are we going to go about fixing that?
Right.
And then generally, how do we get into the LLMs like we've described already in the podcast? So this is emerging and it's going to unfold over the next 12 to 18 months. We're going to see an awful lot of change.
Mm-hmm. And I also see it as a sales tool as well because, obviously you've got cars, TV sets, or whatever else you might be selling. That is probably is a lot easier for, in some cases, LLMs and whatever sort of visuals that they have with that can save a lot of time and answer a lot of questions quickly to consumers.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this is an extension of a trend that we've seen already, and that is in the old days, let's say you had to buy a car. In the old days, you didn't know much about cars. You went to the car dealership. The salesperson knew everything about the car.
Mm-hmm.
Then when the internet got big, you could do all kinds of research, and not from just official, review companies, but you could see individual users would write reviews. You could get a whole lot more information and walk into a dealership prepared, knowing what you want, what the specs are, how it compares. I think we're going to see something like that become even more refined, more polished, and
Mm-hmm.
better answers from generative AI going forward. That's going to be a lot easier. Instead of spending hours and hours doing searches and trying to pull information together, it's basically presenting you with a dossier
Right.
that's an answer to whatever question that you ask, which is pretty incredible. Again, the drawbacks are you got to make sure it's accurate. So you mentioned Perplexity. In my observation, they were one of the first LLMs to provide source links. So it will tell you
Mm-hmm.
where it got the information. You can
Right.
click the link and go check out the source
Right.
and see, is this credible? Do I believe that? And all of the, as far as I can tell, all of the other LLMs have since followed suit because, we know working in public relations, having, credible sources citing your data is important.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're starting to see the LLMs do that. There's also one other emerging property that LLMs are the companies that make them are working on to combat the hallucination, right? So for whatever reason, they don't really understand why, but you can ask a generative AI tool a question, and if it doesn't know the answers, once in a while, this happens more often than not, it gets it right, but once in a while, it doesn't know the answer, and it just makes one up. It just gives you an answer that's completely fictional, and it presents it with such confidence. You're like, it'd be like somebody like, well, here's the answer. I'm absolutely confident it is, right? And you don't know. And they don't really know why that's happening. But one of the things they're working on to develop is this new development called reasoning. And what reasoning is doing is it's showing you the steps of how the LLM got to the answer that it is. And I
Mm-hmm.
think all of these developments will make LLMs more credible, more conclusive. They're going to get better over time and deliver better answers. So it's something that the PR community really needs to pay attention to.
I would think so, and I just keep thinking of some other areas that it can be used in. I mean, public relations, sales, just general information, at a conference of some kind. A lot of different ways that or students can call up and or interact with it to get responses to particular questions have to do with classroom materials and so forth. And it comes
Well,
through, and I guess they could add visuals to this thing as we move along.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a couple of very definitive applications in public relations that are already happening. If you're using most of the big PR vendors, if you're using Muckrack, Cision just added it. Meltwater's got a huge AI team. I mean, they've got
Mm-hmm.
scientists. They've gone out and done acquisitions just to hire scientists with PhDs to help them work on this stuff. All of the big ones have that. So they can do things like if you're using media monitoring, it can better categorize, placements and put tags and categories of it. Is it a story? Is it a mention? Is it a backlink?
Mm-hmm.
PR people are using it for brainstorming, right? Like you just need to, sometimes looking at a blank page is the biggest hurdle to getting started when you're doing a writing project. Well,
Right. Right.
get into a generative AI system, ask it a bunch of questions. It's going to give you a
Mm-hmm.
whole bunch of ideas.
Right.
Summarization, exceptional at summarization. Like, here's a big report. I don't have time to read this whole thing, but read it for me and give me the 5 key points I need to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Take my blog post or press release and give me 10 tweets that I can then go ahead and schedule, or Facebook posts or LinkedIn posts. Like
Mm-hmm.
a lot of use cases. There's a few vendors that are doing some interesting things where it has prompts that will help you write a pitch or help you write a press release. I'm not big into that. I think it's good for brainstorming, but I'd rather have a human write. I think humans write better than generative AI. At least PR
Mm-hmm.
people do. But one of the interesting things that one of these tools does is it will look at the words that you are using as you're writing your pitch, and then it will go out and review articles that are currently published by reporters and come back as you're writing your pitch and saying you should pitch these people because they've written these topics and here's the link to that. That's a pretty cool application of
Mm-hmm.
generative AI.
One of the things that I have done with things such as Chat GPT, for instance, that I might lay out some things that I'd like for you to write for me on this. Then once
Yeah.
it comes out, then I will take it and make it my own. In other words, put in the words or other things in there that it makes it as though it's coming from me, but it has saved me a lot of time. And and I'm just tweaking it so that I'm comfortable with what it says rather than just ripping and running with it. That could cause some problems down the road.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I think what you said is really important that if you're using these tools, think about it as a first draft and then edit
Right.
it and make it your own. The problem is I mean, generative AI is basically these LLMs are giant models of words, and it understands how people tend to put those words in a certain order based on probability. It is probable that a sentence is going to read a certain way and have a certain structure. And so what that means is the answers that generative AI is giving you is by definition an average. Here is the average language that most people use. And we know in PR, we don't want to be average. We want to be different. We
Right.
want to explain to people what's different about our products, what's better,
Absolutely.
right? So it's really important to make sure you have that human touch. But I think your application is of the tool is a good one. I do that an awful lot where if I don't like the way a sentence is written, I'll ask it, rewrite this sentence, give me a better structure.
Hmm.
Is there an easier way to write it? Or another application is, I don't really like this headline. I'm using the subheadline here. Can you give me 5 alternatives?
Hmm.
And it'll belt them out, and I can choose to use it. I can rearrange. I can mix and match, and that's helping me to make my content better.
Well, actually, with this podcast now, it records everything, and then it cranks out not only the transcript for me, but it also suggests titles for each
Yeah.
episode. Now, I'll read those. Either I like them or don't like them, or I'll make alterations to them. But it gives me
Yeah.
all of that. It gives me, the blurbs for Facebook and other social media posts and those kind of things. I read them. If I like them, fine. If not, I change them. But these things are a great time saver. Is what I'm really seeing here. There's a huge amount of time being saved and helping you get the job done faster, and in some cases maybe even more accurately, because it may come up with some information that you had overlooked, because as you said, these things reach out to a wide range of places to pick up the information and add it to what it's giving to you.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's almost cliche to say this at some point, but the topic comes up over and over as people are like, are we going to be replaced by generative AI? And I don't think we are going to be replaced
Hmm.
as individuals. Generative AI is very good at specific tasks, but it can't do a job. You can't say, go be my PR person for me, right? It
Right.
can't do that. But PR people need to pay attention to this stuff, because while you probably won't be replaced by generative AI, you could be replaced by somebody that has learned how to use it
Right.
effectively and been
Hmm.
able to be more productive. That's a real risk.
The other thing, when I look at a lot of times about public relations a lot of times is a problem-solving exercise. And if the platform doesn't know what the problems are, it can't offer you any solutions to them. So,
That's
the
right.
question said,
But
how do
you
we
could
fix
use it
A,
to
B, C, and D?
brainstorm possible.
That's right.
But you
So,
could use it to brainstorm possible solutions. I completely identify with the problem solving, because when I'm obviously a consultant now, but I spent 10 years on the in-house side.
right.
And anytime somebody got a question that they didn't know how to answer, they sent it to one of two places: corporate communications or the legal department. So you're constantly getting these crazy, wild requests that you're like, why am I getting this?
All
I don't know
right.
what to do. But if you have an LLM system that's trained on your internal documentation, it's a great place to start. Start
Hmm.
brainstorming. Here's the problem. How do I solve this? Right? It's just a good way to show how you can be more efficient and effective and productive using these tools.
Great. Well, Frank, you've provided us with an awful lot of information now, really, on LLMs. Are there any closing remarks you think that we need to cover so that our listeners can be not completely, but even more up to speed on these LLMs?
I think the key is to get out there and experiment with them. Make it a point to set some time aside and try to use some of these tools. It doesn't matter really which one you use. If you like ChatGPT, go for it. If you like Perplexity, which is one of the ones I really like, go for it. If you want to use Google Gemini, go for it. But take some time to experiment with
Hmm.
brainstorming, with rewriting headlines, with having it giving you blurbs to post on social media. Give this stuff a try, so that you get some experience with it, and
Right.
how what the possibilities are, because the changes are going to come fast and furious. The development is happening at a pace that is just unbelievably quick, and these tools are getting better and better. I mean, think about when ChatGPT launched, what, 2 years ago, when
Hmm.
it first started. It was really a stunning event. People were
Right.
like, "Oh my gosh, amazing!" And it's come so far in such a short time.
Absolutely.
I saw this, it's kind of a meme not too long ago, and it showed like a chariot from thousands of years ago, and then it showed a horse-drawn carriage in like the 1800s. It's like, look, this is 2,000 years. Technology hasn't changed much.
Hmm.
But then when you think about the pace of change from the time Wright brothers launched an aircraft to now, where we're putting robots and
Right.
with helicopters on Mars, or landing these things on like we just took a sample from a comet in outer space. We landed a device on a comet in outer space, took a sample and brought it back to Earth. Like the pace of change is remarkable.
Right.
That is going to happen in these generative AI applications tools. So the pace of change has increased.
Well, Frank, let me say thank you once again. You have provided us with some very, very valuable information. I've learned something. I'm sure all listeners will learn something. And I'm certainly glad that you've been a guest on the Public Relations Review for a second time. And perhaps down the road, we'll probably reach out to you again.
I thank you. I'll be here. Thanks for having me on, Peter.
Okay. And to our listeners, thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed the Public Relations Review podcast, we'd certainly like to get a review from you. And also let your friends know to listen to the next edition of the Public Relations Review podcast.
This podcast is produced by Communication Strategies, an award-winning public relations and public affairs firm headquartered in Nashville, Tennessee. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, this is Peter Woolfolk. First, let me say thank you so much for being a listener. Now, I want to alert you to our shiny new podcast website located at podpage.com. However, you can go directly to the podcast site located at publicrelationsreviewpodcast.com. There, you can contact me through email. You can leave a voice message. You can leave a review. You can read an episode blog and frequently learn about the podcast guests. You might also want to suggest podcast topic ideas or even suggest a guest. You can also let me know if you would like to receive our podcast listener logo that you can post on your social media. So I look forward to hearing from you about our new podcast website. Thank you so much for listening to the Public Relations Review podcast and have a great day.